Let's go now live to the press conference with the Prime Minister, Chris Hipkins, and the Deputy Prime Minister, Carmel Sipilonga.
I want to acknowledge the situation that New Zealanders have been waking up to this morning. A lot of families displaced, a lot of homes without power, extensive damage done across the country. It will take us a wee while to get a handle on exactly what's happened. I want to acknowledge those families that are currently functioning without power and in some cases without communications. We'll be working as quickly as we can with the relevant agencies to make sure that we're getting the power back on, to make sure we're restoring communications as quickly as we possibly can. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the incredible work that's being done by our first responders around the country. Fire and Emergency had an enormous number of call-outs last night, and I want to acknowledge that in many cases they were attended by volunteers. The volunteer response across the country has been a phenomenal one. We've seen community groups coming together to support their fellow Kiwis who have been in need, and I really want to thank them. I'm here today, this morning, at the Trust Stadium, where that is a good example of the sort of community-driven response that we are seeing. We're seeing the community coming together, volunteers, making sure that they are supporting people who have been displaced, supporting people who are in need. I had the opportunity to speak just before with some of the families from Muriwai who were evacuated in the middle of the night. They were indicating they had felt incredibly well supported through that process. Obviously a very traumatic thing to happen in the middle of the night, and they have been very well supported here and throughout the response. And we'll continue to work with those community groups to make sure that we're providing them with as much support as we can so that they can provide support to the communities that have been affected. I am hoping to get back to Wellington later on today, where I'll get a briefing from the team at NEMA, who have now stood up the full national emergency response. We'll then be able to provide a fuller update, including some of the facts and figures that I know people will be looking for later on today and potentially early this evening. People will be aware that a national state of emergency has been declared, and that means that we'll be throwing everything at this to make sure we're providing as much support to the response as possible. We have the Defence Force on the ground now, already providing a lot of logistical support, helping with evacuations, helping to keep essential supplies moving, and in due course helping with the clean-up when we get to that point. Defence Force will provide more support as appropriate, and of course we will have other arms of government ready to go. Many of them have been working around the clock for some time now. I want to acknowledge that this extreme weather event, one of the biggest that we have seen in recent times, probably the biggest that we have seen in recent times, comes hot on the heels of other extreme weather events that we have seen. And that means that for our first responders, for our emergency support agencies, it is a particularly tiring time, a particularly stressful time. And so I want to again, on behalf of all New Zealanders, reiterate our thanks to all those who are working around the clock to support those who need that extra support. I'm now happy to open up for questions.
Prime Minister, this is the third time a state of emergency has been declared. How significant is that?
Look, this is very significant. The fact that we've declared a national state of emergency means that the statutory threshold for a national state of emergency has been reached. And that means that the local response needs additional support nationally in terms of being able to manage it. It is a pretty high threshold for a national state of emergency to be declared. So the fact that we have done that shows just how big the situation is that we're dealing with.
Are you satisfied with the time it's taken to declare that state of emergency?
The Minister for Emergency Management and I have been getting updates every 4 hours over the last 24 hours or so. Obviously, overnight, it's difficult in the dark to find out exactly what's happening. At first light this morning, as soon as the extent of the disruption and the damage became clear, advice was provided to the Minister and therefore through the Minister to me that a national state of emergency should be declared, and we acted on that immediately. It's still too early to get a count on the number of people displaced, to the number of potential injuries. I do want to acknowledge fire and emergency, though, dealing with a situation where they have at least one volunteer missing. That is a really challenging time. I want to extend our support to the relevant families and to the whole team at Fire and Emergency, who will be feeling this whilst they're continuing to do their work as well.
What about the volunteers, but what about Gisborne, the situation that it's in, and particularly with that slash and the issue that it's causing? How do you respond to that?
One of the challenges with Gisborne at the moment is that communications in and out of Gisborne are very limited. So we're working to try and assess and get as much information about the situation on the ground as we can. And that has proven to be very difficult in the last few hours. We will have people on the ground there. Making sure that they're providing as much support as they can. The situation around the slashes, clearly there'll be an opportunity, I think, for us to have a good look at that, and that will include looking backwards as well as looking forwards. Right at the moment, I think we just need to get through the next 24 to 48 hours, but I think clearly we will need to have a look back and see what happened, why it happened, and make sure that we're capturing any relevant lessons from that.
Prime Minister, Christopher Luxon spoke earlier about how questions need to be raised on how homes were built and the areas that were built 50 years ago. So because of where areas have been hit by the cyclone, can we expect our building code to change?
There is legislation before the House at the moment, the Natural and Built Environments Bill, which is working its way through the House at the moment, that will place a much greater emphasis on natural hazards when it comes to things like deciding where we build. That is something where I think we've got a long history of perhaps poor past decisions in New Zealand that we're confronting right now. It's not that helpful for people who are up to their waists in water to be having that debate right at the moment, but it absolutely is one that we need to have as a country, and we need to look at the sustainability of some of the places where we have built previously.
How worried are you about this is taking
We know that there is a significant mental health impact of events like this, and that comes on top of other recent natural disasters, and then of course the COVID-19 response and all of the other things that we've dealt with as a country over the last few years. We've dealt with everything. If you think about the last sort of decade and a half or so, we've had everything from earthquakes, natural disasters, volcanic eruptions, weather events. It is a lot, and for some people those things accumulate, and the mental health impact could be a significant one. We're very aware of that as a government, and we'll be making sure that we provide as much mental health support as we can.
And what about the financial toll? Because people are hurting, businesses are hurting, insurance, and that. What sort of are you going to provide financially for people, and to help out in that sense?
We're very aware that there's a lot of families already in financial distress because of the global economic situation that people are tackling at the moment. It'll take us a few days to really kind of get a handle on how and how many families have been affected by these extra events of the last few days when it comes to the extreme weather. And that will include working with the insurance companies to get a good handle on how much of the damage will be covered by insurance and how much won't be. It will include working with all of the relevant community agencies to make sure that we're supporting those most vulnerable whānau who won't have some of those other supports that many of us would rely on these sorts of circumstances.
What added resourcing or central government power is added by declaring a national state of emergency?
At the highest level, the first thing it does is allows us to get a better coordination of the response across the country. With an event of the size and the scale that we have seen in the last 24 hours, what we have to do is make sure that we're dealing with the most pressing needs across the country as quickly as we can, and that we're getting the resources to the right place. So a national coordination function, which is now kicked in as a result of declaring a national state of emergency, will make sure that we're getting energy to where it's most needed, most urgently. Then, of course, we will activate a lot of other support. I do want to be clear, though, that we've had a lot of nationally focused support being provided to support the local response teams. Declaring a national state of emergency, though, lifts the coordination up a level, and it means that we'll now be coordinating across the country.
Have we had any offers of aid or support from overseas countries?
I haven't, I'm not aware of that at this point. I'm sure that there will have been certainly messages of support. I had a phone call, a pre-planned phone call this morning with Prime Minister Sunak from the UK, and the first thing that he did in that call was to express the UK's support to the people of New Zealand as we're going through what is clearly a very challenging period at the moment caused by the weather. And I imagine that sentiment will have been echoed by leaders around the world. Not all of those messages will have made it to me yet, but I'm sure in due course they will.
Prime Minister, what sort of contact have you had with the Mayor of Auckland in the last?
I've spoke to him over the weekend around the preparations and made sure that he has had all of the support. I haven't spoken to him this morning, but I have spoken to him over the weekend to make sure that they have been getting from central government the support that they need, and I'll continue to keep in touch with him. He's certainly got my number as well, so that if anything comes up where he's looking for extra support from central government, I will endeavour to provide that.
Prime Minister, will the government commit to more funding to support the recovery?
We will do what we need to do in order to support New Zealanders through this. Our focus right now is on the immediate response. It's on making sure that people have a roof over their head, that they have a meal, that their families are well cared for. That's the immediate focus. The recovery effort is something that we will absolutely be placing front and centre of the government's program over the next few weeks and months. We know that this won't be an overnight recovery. It's going to take a while. Some people will be displaced from their homes for an extended period of time, for example, and we'll need to support them through that. Businesses will continue to feel the tail of this for some time, and we'll need to support them through that as well. We'll work out in the next few days and weeks how best to do that.
Prime Minister, have you had a chance to speak to any Kiwis who have had to be evacuated from their homes?
Yeah, so like I said, I've spoken to some here at the Trust Stadium. They felt very well supported through that process. Having said that, they haven't had a lot of sleep. It's been a pretty rough night for them. They'll be wanting to get some rest. And of course, they have the uncertainty of not knowing what's going to happen next. In many cases, they won't know what's happened to their homes after they've left their homes. So they've got a pretty uncertain period of time ahead of them. And I think all New Zealanders who are hunkered down at home, potentially watching this at the moment, will be wrapping them with as much support as they possibly can from afar, because I think we could all imagine how we would feel in those circumstances.
What's the dialogue like between you and them? Is there a sense of frustration or fear or?
No, look, they are feeling very well supported, and I'm really encouraged by that. They're feeling very well cared for, but of course they're displaced, and so there's all of the anxiety that goes with that as well. But I haven't seen any anger or anything like that bubbling over. I think people generally accept that this is an extreme weather event. A lot of preparation has gone into making sure that we were ready for this, so that where people had to evacuate, they would be well supported. Certainly that's been the case here in Auckland. Of course, we'll get a better handle on what's happening around the rest of the country in the next few days.
Prime Minister, what about you? What did your night look like? Did you sleep at all, or were you up taking phone calls, monitoring everything around the country?
A little bit of both. I did get some sleep overnight because obviously I was expecting a big day ahead and I wanted to make sure that I was ready for that. But I have been getting regular updates. As I said, I've been getting updates from the NEMA team every sort of 4 to 6 hours on whether a state of national emergency was going to be required. And I got up reasonably early this morning again to try and assess the damage. It takes a wee while after day breaks for us to actually get a handle on what's happening because, like it or not, you can have the best technology in the world, but until the sun comes up and you can actually see what's going on, there's a limited amount that you can do and that you can know overnight.
Has the Defence Force been able to provide air support to the many towns now cut off by road and rail, and will it be able to?
Obviously air support and air travel is quite challenging at the moment given the high levels of winds that we're experiencing. Even here you can hear outside that there's a very strong wind out there at the moment, and that will probably be limiting the amount of support that can be supplied by air. The Defence Force, the Air Force, I know have been on standby. They are ready to go at the point that they are required. Defence Force are providing a lot of land support at the moment, so they've got their large vehicles out there helping with the evacuation, helping to move supplies around as necessary. And there's actually naval support being provided at the moment. I believe that one of our ships is out there at the moment trying to find a yacht that is adrift at sea. So the Defence Force is there, it's ready, and it's deploying its assets as appropriate.
This week, will you be heading back to the Beehive at Parliament and will you still be sitting?
Parliament's Business Committee is meeting at lunchtime, so I'll let the relevant. I'm no longer as involved in those discussions as I used to be, so I'll let the relevant ministers and MPs and the Speaker communicate the decisions of the Business Committee. But clearly, it is not unusual when emergencies happen for Parliament's program to be disrupted.
Have you had any contact with the families of the firefighters affected by the Cyclone Gabrielle?
Not as yet, no. Yeah.
So Parliament won't be adjourned then?
As the Prime Minister, of course, I don't make that decision unilaterally. That decision's made by Parliament's Business Committee. My understanding, I think, is the meeting is sometime around midday. It might be 12:30, and then they'll be able to communicate the decision around Parliament's the effect this weather is going to have on Parliament's sitting program after that. Bearing in mind, of course, that a lot of members of Parliament haven't actually been able to get to Wellington for Parliament sitting because of the extreme weather we've seen in the last 48 hours.
Go back today, or would you be better off staying here with, what's happening?
Look, it's kind of an hour-by-hour review at the moment. I have some plans in place potentially to get to Wellington today because obviously I'd like to be able to touch base now with the National Emergency Response. But in the event that I can't do that, I'm sure that there'll be plenty else that I will be able to do here in Auckland or potentially in other parts of the country, depending on where I end up. So.
Reportedly, Chris Hipkins is asking MPs to go back to their communities. Would you like your MPs to say?
Look, I would just ask all MPs, wherever they are in the country, to just follow guidance around safe travel. I acknowledge they'll want to be with their constituencies and providing support in their constituencies where they can. And where it's safe for them to travel in order to do that, then yes, I think that is appropriate. But just follow the travel guidance that's being issued at the moment. There's a lot of disruption on the roading network in particular. So just make sure that they're leading by example in terms of following the guidance that's being issued to others.